Hey everyone, this is Jungkook. Before we start, I want to know where you're listening from. Drop your country in the comments below. It always amazes me when I see people from every corner of the world connecting with something so personal to me. Music has always been that bridge, but today, I'm not here to talk about a stage, a performance, or an album. Today, I want to share something I never thought I'd say out loud, something that's been weighing on me, shaping me, and maybe even surprising me as much as it might surprise you. I've made a decision that feels so far away from the boy who grew up in Busan chasing a dream on stages across the world. A decision that feels almost unthinkable for someone who has lived under bright lights, constant cameras, endless schedules. I've decided that when I get married, and yes, I know I'm not married yet, it's still something in the future. I'm going to move to a small town in America. Not forever, maybe not for the rest of my life, but long enough to breathe differently, to see life from another angle, and to live with a kind of simplicity I've never had before. At first, when the thought entered my mind, I resisted it. I told myself I wasn't built for quiet towns or ordinary streets. I told myself my life was meant for big cities, busy airports, and stadiums full of people. But the more I sat with that idea, the more it felt like the truth I'd been running away from. And maybe, if I'm being completely honest, part of that truth has roots in something from my childhood. You see, there's a person I once knew, someone I grew up with in Busan. She was my friend, my companion, in ways that didn't make headlines, because back then there were no cameras. Just afternoons filled with laughter, small secrets, and dreams neither of us fully understood. She was the kind of friend who made ordinary days feel alive. She had a way of noticing things others overlooked: the stray cat that always lingered near the market, the small flowers growing between cracks in the pavement, the quiet loneliness in people's eyes. And she used to tell me that life isn't measured by how much noise you make, but by how deeply you feel. I didn't know it back then, but I carried those words with me long after I left Busan. Carried them into practice rooms, onto stages, into the chaos of a life that sometimes felt too big for me. But here's the part I never talk about. There was a moment years ago where my family and hers had quietly spoken about us, about whether maybe one day we would be more than friends. A marriage arrangement, a possibility, a thought for the future. And I said no, not because I didn't care about her, but because I was young, restless, hungry for something else. I couldn't imagine being tied down when the world was calling. I wanted to be free to chase stages, to prove something not just to my family or my friends, but to myself. So I walked away from that idea, politely, firmly, without regret, or at least that's what I told myself. But here I am, years later, standing in front of millions of you, admitting that sometimes the things you turn away from are the very things that follow you the longest. I've had success, fame, experiences most people can only dream of. Yet in the quiet moments, late at night when the lights are off and there's no one to perform for, my mind drifts back to her, not as some perfect fantasy, but as a reminder of the kind of life I left behind. Moving to a small town in America isn't just about geography. It's about chasing that feeling again, the feeling of being known, not as Jungkook of BTS, but as a person. Someone who laughs, makes mistakes, loves, regrets, and hopes. Someone who doesn't have to live up to the weight of an image. It's about choosing simplicity, choosing honesty, choosing connection. I want to tell you how this idea began to grow inside me. A few months ago, after finishing one of the busiest stretches of my career, I came back to Seoul and found myself in an apartment that felt too quiet. The city outside my window was alive, horns blaring, neon signs flashing, streets filled with endless movement. But inside, it was just me and my thoughts, me and a silence that felt heavier than any sound. I thought about all the things I had: music, fans who love me, opportunities, dreams still unfolding. But I also thought about what I didn't have, someone who knew me, not for the lights, not for the headlines, but for the boy from Busan who once sat by the ocean and whispered secrets to the waves. And that's when she came back into my mind, that childhood friend. The one I had pushed away when the idea of being with her felt too small, too ordinary for the dreams I thought I needed to chase. And I wondered what if ordinary was exactly what I had been searching for all along. Of course, life doesn't rewind. I can't go back to that moment and say yes instead of no. I can't undo the years of distance, the choices that carried me here, but I can choose differently now. I can choose to live in a way that honors the part of me that once felt complete in simplicity. That's why I'm telling you this today, not because I have a date set, not because there's a wedding around the corner, but because I want you to understand that when it happens, when I finally step into that chapter, I'm choosing not just a person, but a way of life. A small town in America. That's where I imagine starting over, not because it's glamorous, not because it's what people expect of me, but because it's where I believe I'll finally breathe in a way I haven't in years. And as I sit here sharing this with you, I realize something important. Regret isn't about wishing you could change the past. Regret is about understanding what you missed and deciding never to miss it again. I once turned away from someone who mattered. I can't undo that choice, but I can make new ones. I can choose love, authenticity, and simplicity now. And that's exactly what I intend to do. This is only the beginning of the story. There's so much more. I want to tell you about how I rediscovered her, about the conversations that reopened my heart, about the way her presence reminds me of who I used to be, and maybe most of all, about how saying no once taught me the importance of saying yes now. So, stay with me. Because this isn't just about me moving to a town far away, or about a wedding that hasn't even happened yet. This is about a journey back to myself, and maybe to the love I almost lost. When I think back to that night in my apartment, staring at the city lights and realizing how heavy silence can feel, I remember the exact moment my heart whispered her name. Not out loud, not with intention, but like a memory that refused to be buried. It was as if Busan itself had reached across time to remind me of who I once was, before the stages, before the flights, before the headlines. And it wasn't just her face. I remembered it was the feeling of being understood without words. I kept asking myself why she came back into my thoughts that night. Why now, after all these years, after countless moments with people who had come and gone in my life? Maybe it's because for the first time in a long time, I had space to feel the emptiness. When you're constantly moving, constantly working, you don't stop to notice the hollow parts. But when the noise dies down, when the music fades, the silence forces you to confront what's missing. And in that silence, I realized something I'd never admitted to myself. Saying no to her all those years ago wasn't just about chasing freedom. It was about fear. Fear of being known too deeply. Fear that if someone saw all of me, the flaws, the insecurities, the restless heart, they might not stay. It was easier to run into the arms of ambition than to risk the vulnerability of love. That fear followed me everywhere, on every stage, behind every smile, in the middle of every achievement. People saw perfection, but I felt the cracks, and the cracks whispered her name. I thought about how she used to challenge me even when we were kids. When everyone else would just nod along with whatever I said, she would tilt her head, look me in the eye, and ask, "But why?" If I said I wanted to be famous, she'd ask, "What for?" If I bragged about running faster or singing louder, she'd shrug and say, "That's cool, but how does it make you a better person?" At the time, it annoyed me. I wanted applause, not questions. But now, years later, I see that she was the only one who ever asked me to think about who I was becoming, not just what I was achieving. And that's when the thought of moving to a small town in America stopped being just an idea. It became a vision, a place where I could breathe again. A place where I could be that boy who once sat with her on rooftops, staring at the stars, talking about dreams without the pressure of turning them into global headlines. A place where life wasn't about schedules or cameras, but about presence, about choosing who you wanted to be every single day. But here's the truth, I need to confess to you. I haven't seen her in years. We lost touch after I left Busan, and the world swallowed me whole. She went one way, I went another. And yet, somehow, she never left me. She lived in the back of my mind, not as a perfect image, but as a mirror of what I longed for. And maybe that's why the thought of marriage feels so different now. It's not about fulfilling expectations or living out someone else's dream for me. It's about returning to something pure, something honest. I don't know when I'll get married or exactly how it will happen. But I know this. When I do, I want it to be with the kind of person who makes me feel like she once did. Someone who looks past the image, past the noise, past the perfection, and sees me for who I really am. Some people will say I'm running away, that moving to a small town is a way of escaping the weight of fame. But they don't understand this isn't about running away, it's about running towards something, towards simplicity, toward authenticity, toward the part of me that got lost somewhere between the stages and the headlines. I imagine walking down quiet streets where nobody cares about album sales or streaming charts. I imagine buying groceries without cameras following me. I imagine evenings where the loudest sound is just laughter at a dinner table, not the roar of thousands of fans. And in those moments, I imagine looking across the table and seeing her or someone like her and realizing that love doesn't need to be complicated to be profound. Sometimes I wonder what she would say if she saw me now. If she knew that the boy who once said no is now the man willing to say yes. Would she smile and forgive the years of silence? Would she shake her head at my stubbornness? Or would she simply look at me with the same knowing eyes and remind me, like she always did, that character matters more than success? I don't know the answers. But I do know this. My future won't be built on fear anymore. I may not know when I'll get married, but I know why. Not for headlines, not for appearances, not because it's expected, but because I want to build a life that feels whole. And that life, I've realized, isn't in the noise of big cities. It's in the quiet of small towns, in the presence of people who see you clearly. So when I tell you that I plan to move to a small town in America after I get married, understand this. It's not about distance, it's about closeness. Not about leaving fans behind, but about finally letting myself step into a life that feels real. And maybe, just maybe, it's about honoring the girl I once turned away from. Because in some way, every choice I make now is an echo of that moment. And this time, I want to choose differently. There's something about memory that refuses to obey the rules of time. You think the past is gone, neatly folded away, but then one smell, one sound, one quiet night can pull you back to moments you thought you had left behind forever. For me, that night in Seoul, surrounded by a city that wouldn't stop moving, even when I had finally stood still, was the moment everything unraveled. I closed my eyes, and suddenly I was a boy again, sitting on the edge of a pier in Busan, watching the water shift and shimmer under the moonlight. And beside me, there she was, my childhood friend. Her laughter was softer than the waves, but stronger too, because it stayed with me long after the sound faded. We didn't need much back then, just a couple of worn-out sneakers, a bag of snacks, and the belief that we were invincible. She used to nudge my shoulder and say, "Don't forget these nights when you're famous one day." I'd laugh, brushing it off, not realizing that one day I'd give anything to go back to that exact moment. When people talk about love, they usually talk about fireworks, about overwhelming passion, about instant recognition. But what I felt back then wasn't like that. It wasn't loud or explosive. It was quiet, steady, like a song you don't notice at first, but can't stop humming after it ends. That's the kind of connection that shapes you in ways you only realize years later. I keep asking myself why I said no when the idea of marriage between us was mentioned. Was I afraid of being ordinary? Was I too blinded by ambition to see what was right in front of me? Or maybe I thought I needed to conquer the world before I could be worthy of her. Whatever the reason, I walked away. I chose the noise over the silence, the spotlight over the quiet pier. And yet, the irony is this. All those years of chasing the spotlight only led me back to the silence. To nights where the weight of the world was heavier than the applause. To mornings where the achievements felt hollow without someone to share them with. To the realization that maybe I had confused greatness with meaning. That's why the idea of moving to a small town in America feels less like an escape and more like a return. A return not to Busan itself, but to the boy I was when I still believed the small things were enough. A return to the version of myself who found joy in late night walks, in simple meals, in conversations that stretched until dawn without a single camera capturing them. I imagine what life would look like there. Waking up to the sound of birds instead of notifications. Walking down streets where people don't recognize me, or if they do, they treat me like a neighbor instead of an icon. Spending evenings cooking dinner, sitting across from someone who doesn't care about streaming numbers but cares about whether I've really listened to them when they talk about their day. And every time I let myself dream of that, she returns. That girl from Busan. She isn't a ghost, not regret haunting me, but a compass pointing me toward the kind of love I want. A love that isn't built on appearances or expectations, but on presence and character. A love that doesn't ask me to be anything other than myself, yet inspires me to become better anyway. I don't know where she is now. Maybe she's married. Maybe she's living a life so far from mine that our paths will never cross again. But even if that's the case, the lesson she left me with is still here. The reminder that who you choose matters, not because of how they fit into your life, but because of how they shape who you become. That's why when I think of marriage now, I don't imagine grand ceremonies or luxurious plans. I imagine something simple, something honest. A ceremony where the focus isn't on the spectacle, but on the promise. A home where the walls aren't lined with trophies or awards, but with the quiet certainty of being seen and accepted. Sometimes I wonder if people will understand this choice. If Army will look at me and say, why would Jungkook, who has everything, want to live in a place where nobody knows his name? But that's exactly why. Because everything isn't really everything if it doesn't include love, if it doesn't include the kind of connection that makes life worth all the effort. I've learned that love doesn't erase who you are, it doesn't solve all your problems, and it doesn't complete you like some fairy tale. What it does, at least the kind of love I dream about, is remind you that you don't have to carry everything alone. That being seen, truly seen, is the rarest kind of gift. And I think about what it would mean to look at my future wife across that small town dinner table. To know that even if the world outside still calls me Jungkook of BTS, inside that room, I am just me. Just a boy who once sat on a pier in Busan, nervous and restless, not realizing he already had everything that mattered beside him. So when I say I'm moving to a small town in America after I get married, understand that it's not just about location, it's about redemption. It's about finally choosing the life I once thought was too small and realizing it's the only life big enough to hold the kind of love I want. And maybe, just maybe, it's about finding her again, or finding the part of myself she believed in. Either way, it's a choice I no longer fear making. There's a strange thing that happens when you allow yourself to remember. At first, it's just a flicker, one image, one sound, one moment. But once you open the door, memories rush in like a tide, you can't stop. That's what happened to me after that night in Seoul when her face came back to me. I found myself remembering details I didn't even know. I still carried the way she tied her hair in the morning before school. The way her laughter always came half a second too late, like she needed time to decide whether something was truly funny. The way she looked at me when I told her about my dream of becoming a singer, not with disbelief, but with the kind of quiet conviction that made me believe it too. The more I remembered, the more I realized that part of me had been waiting for her all along. Not in the literal sense life isn't a movie where childhood friends are destined to fall back into each other's arms, but in the sense that I had been waiting for someone who made me feel that same way again. Safe, seen, challenged, understood. And the truth is, in all the years since, no one else ever quite matched that. So I did something I hadn't done in a very long time. I went looking. It started small, almost embarrassingly so. Late at night, when the rest of the world was asleep, I opened my laptop and typed her name into a search bar. I didn't expect much. She wasn't a celebrity. She wasn't someone the world followed. But I wondered if maybe she'd left a digital trail, a social media account, a news article from her work, maybe even a random photo tagged by a friend. And in that quiet search, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, hope mixed with fear. Hope that she was out there, living a life that might somehow intersect with mine again. Fear that she had moved so far ahead without me that I would never catch up. I didn't find her right away. The internet is big, but not every life lives online. Instead, what I found was myself scrolling through page after page, remembering that sometimes the things that matter most can't be discovered with a click. Sometimes they have to be sought with patience, with presence, with real effort. But even without finding her, the search itself reminded me of something I had almost forgotten. I still cared. And that caring was enough to change me. In the weeks that followed, I began to notice how different my days felt. When I practiced, I thought less about perfection and more about expression. When I sang, I wasn't trying to impress. I was trying to feel. When I looked out into the audience, I didn't just see a sea of faces. I imagined hers, somewhere in the crowd, listening not to the artist, but to the person behind the music. And with that shift came a decision. If marriage is truly my future, if I'm really serious about moving to a small town in America afterward, then I need to start living in a way that honors that choice now. I can't wait until later to become the kind of man who values connection over performance, character over image, simplicity over spectacle. I need to start now. So I began changing little things. I stopped filling every spare moment with noise. I let myself sit in silence without reaching for my phone. I started writing not songs for an album, not lyrics for release, but letters I would never send. Letters to her. Letters to the boy I once was. Letters to the man I hope to become. In those letters, I confessed what I had never said out loud. That I had been wrong to dismiss her so easily. That the life I chased wasn't the life I truly needed. That I was finally ready to face the vulnerability I had once run from. And though she would never read those words, writing them changed me. It was like laying down the weight I had carried for years without even realizing it. And maybe that's why the vision of a small town life feels so real now. Because it isn't just about her anymore, it's about the kind of person I want to be for whoever I marry. Someone who shows up, someone who listens, someone who isn't afraid to sit across from another human being and let himself be known, flaws and all. People often ask me what my biggest dream is. They expect me to say something about music, about stages, about reaching new heights. But the truth, my biggest dream now is much simpler. It's waking up next to someone who sees me for who I am, not what I've done. It's sitting on a porch in a quiet town, sipping coffee, watching the world move slowly for once. It's walking through streets where nobody cares about fame, but everyone cares about each other. And when I picture that life, I can't help but wonder if it's too much to hope that she might be there too. The girl I once turned away from, the one who taught me, without ever knowing it, what love really means. But whether she is or isn't, the path is the same. The choice is the same. The future is the same. Because what I'm really moving toward isn't just a place or a person. It's a way of living, a way of loving, a way of becoming someone I can finally be proud of, not just on stage, but in the quiet of my own heart. The night I first tried to search for her online, I didn't expect to find much. And I was right, there was almost nothing. A name that was too common, fragments of accounts that didn't quite match. Blurry images that left me guessing. For a while, I told myself it was better this way. Maybe some things should remain untouched, preserved in memory, rather than disrupted by reality. But the truth is, my heart didn't agree. My heart wanted to know. Not to chase a fantasy, but to close a circle I had left open too long. Weeks passed, and life went on as usual. Rehearsals, recording, planning, schedules, but beneath it all, the search lingered like a quiet current. And then, one afternoon, when I wasn't even trying, I stumbled upon something. It was a message buried deep in an old inbox I hadn't checked in years. A letter from her. I almost didn't believe it at first. The date stunned me. It was from long ago, written in the early years of my career when everything was just beginning. In it, she congratulated me on my debut, told me how proud she was. But then she said something I'll never forget. I hope you don't forget who you are, even when the world tells you who they want you to be. I froze. It was like she had been watching my entire journey from the sidelines, reminding me of something I had almost let slip away. And then at the end, almost casually, she had signed it with a line that hit me harder than anything else. If you ever want to find me, I'll still be here, practicing being the person I hope to become. That phrase, it was exactly the kind of thing she would say. Simple, direct, but deeper than it seemed. Practicing being the person I hope to become. Those words weren't just about her, they were about me too. I sat there staring at that old message for what felt like hours. Suddenly, the memories weren't just memories, they were alive again. I could hear her voice, feel her presence, almost see her standing there, reminding me that I didn't have to carry this life alone. And with that message came something else, a clue. She had mentioned in passing that she was working with children at a local school. No details, no city, but it was enough. For the first time in years, I had a starting point. I didn't rush into it. I couldn't. My life isn't simple. I can't just walk down the street and knock on someone's door. But what I could do was let that message guide me, not as a map, but as a compass. It told me that she hadn't disappeared, that she was still out there, still living, still practicing, and that maybe, just maybe, if I kept walking toward the life I wanted, our paths would cross again. But here's what surprised me most. Even before finding her, I started to change. Knowing that she had once written those words, knowing that she had believed in me enough to remind me of my character, was enough to shift my heart. I began to approach my days differently. I said yes to small acts of kindness. I took time to notice details I once overlooked. I let myself slow down, even when the world pushed me to speed up. Because deep down, I knew that if I ever found her again, I didn't want to be the same boy who said no. I wanted to be the man who finally said yes, not just to her, but to the life she had always seen in me. And that's why the vision of a small town in America keeps pulling me forward. It's not just about romance or nostalgia or running from fame. It's about living in a way that honors that letter, about practicing every single day to be the person I hope to become. Maybe she's still in Korea, maybe she's somewhere else entirely. I don't know. But I do know that the next time our lives intersect, if they do, it won't be by accident. It will be because I finally had the courage to follow the path she pointed me toward all those years ago. I don't know when I'll get married or who exactly I'll marry, but I do know this. When that day comes, I want to stand beside someone who reminds me of her words. Someone who makes me better, not because they demand it, but because their very presence inspires it. Someone who looks at me and sees not just the singer, not just the image, but the person. And maybe without even knowing it, she already shaped that future for me. Because every time I think of love, every time I think of building a life beyond the spotlight, I hear her voice. Don't forget who you are. That's the truth I can no longer ignore. That's the choice I can no longer run from. After I found that old message, everything inside me shifted. It wasn't just nostalgia anymore. It wasn't just a memory I carried like a secret photograph folded in my heart. No, it was real. She had written to me. She had thought of me. And in her words, she had left behind something like a trail. And for the first time in years, I felt like maybe I wasn't chasing a ghost. I kept going back to that line. If you ever want to find me, I'll still be here, practicing being the person I hope to become. The way she phrased it haunted me in the best way. It wasn't a promise, not really. It wasn't a clear location or a declaration that she'd wait. It was simply her truth, offered honestly. She would still be somewhere, still working, still trying, still becoming. And that gave me courage. So I started asking questions, quietly, carefully. I couldn't tell many people what I was doing. Too many eyes on my life, too many rumors waiting to be born, but in conversations that seemed casual, I would drop her name. Old acquaintances, people from Busan, distant family connections. Most shrugged, some tilted their heads, as if trying to remember. And then, one day, someone said something small that changed everything. She's a teacher, right? I think she moved for work a few years ago, somewhere near the coast. Small town, not far from the countryside. That was it. No address, no certainty, just a direction. But to me, it was enough. It meant she was still out there, still living the kind of life she once dreamed of. And for the first time, the thought of moving to a small town in America after marriage didn't feel like a fantasy. It felt like a bridge between who I was, who I am, and who I still hope to become. Because here's the truth. I'm not just looking for her. I'm looking for the version of myself that existed when she was beside me. The boy who could laugh without thinking about cameras. The boy who believed in dreams because someone else believed in him too. The boy who wasn't afraid of being ordinary because ordinary was already extraordinary when shared with someone who understood. I began to imagine what it would be like if I found her. Not in some dramatic scene, not with music swelling or cameras flashing, but in the simplest way. Maybe she'd be walking out of a school one afternoon, holding books in her arms, tired but smiling the way. Only teachers smile, half exhausted, half proud. Maybe she'd look up and see me, not as an idol, not as Jungkook from the headlines, but as the boy she once knew. What would I even say? Would the years melt away, or would they hang heavy between us? Would she smile, Would she turn away? I don't know. And maybe that's what makes the thought so powerful. Because real life isn't scripted. It's raw, unpredictable, sometimes painful, often surprising. And that's what makes it worth living. The more I thought about her, the more I thought about marriage itself. People assume marriage is about compatibility, attraction, timing. And yes, those things matter. But what her letter reminded me is that marriage is also about character. About choosing someone who is practicing just like you to become who they hope to be. About walking side by side. Not because you've already arrived, but because you're both still on the journey. That's why the idea of moving to a small town makes sense to me now. It's not just about escaping fame. It's about creating the kind of environment where character has room to grow. A place where I can practice becoming a better husband, a better person, not just a better performer. A place where love isn't drowned out by noise, but nurtured in silence. Some nights, I still catch myself doubting, wondering if I'm being foolish, wondering if the life I'm imagining could ever truly exist for someone like me. But then I go back to that letter, to her words, to the memory of her laughter by the pier in Busan. And I realize it isn't about certainty, it's about willingness. The willingness to be vulnerable, to be honest, to choose a life that may not look impressive on the outside but feels whole on the inside. I don't know when I'll get married. I don't even know if she and I will meet again. But I do know that when I do take that step, it will be for the right reasons. Not because it's expected of me, not because the world is watching, but because I found someone who reminds me of the lesson she taught me long ago. That who we are becoming matters more than who we already are. And maybe, just maybe, when I walk through that small town someday, whether it's in America or somewhere else entirely, I'll see her again. And if I do, I hope I'll finally be ready to say the words I couldn't back then. Not no, but yes. The more I held on to that old message, the more it began to shape the way I thought about everything, my choices, my relationships, my future. It wasn't just a letter from the past. It was like a mirror reminding me of who I had been and asking me who I wanted to become. And in that mirror, I began to see something I had long avoided. I wasn't just preparing for marriage someday. I was preparing to become someone worthy of it. Marriage. That word used to feel heavy to me, like a weight I wasn't ready to carry. Maybe it was because of the way people around me always spoke about it, with expectations, with pressure, with plans that never seemed to belong to me. Maybe it was because I saw it as something that would take away my freedom, something that would tie me down, when all I wanted was to fly. But now, after years of chasing freedom only to find myself circling back to emptiness, I see it differently. Marriage isn't about losing freedom. It's about finding the kind of freedom that only comes from being known completely and unconditionally. It's about having someone beside you who reminds you that you don't have to do this life alone. It's about walking into a future, not as a perfect person, but as a willing one, willing to grow, to listen, to love, to practice becoming better every single day. When I picture that future now, I don't see a stage or flashing lights. I see a small kitchen table in a town where nobody knows my name. I see 2 cups of coffee, one slightly darker than the other because she always liked it stronger than me. I see mornings where the first words spoken aren't rehearsed or polished, but raw and real. I see evenings where the day ends, not with applause, but with gratitude that we showed up for each other again. And every time I picture that, her face comes back. My childhood friend, the girl who once made me feel like being ordinary wasn't something to run from, but something to embrace. The girl who wrote to me even when the world was pulling me away. The girl whose words still echo, "Don't forget who you are." I think about what it would mean to find her again, not because I expect some fairy tale ending, but because I know she represents the kind of love I want to build. A love that doesn't depend on spectacle. A love that doesn't crumble under the weight of expectations. A love that grows quietly, steadily, through ordinary days and small choices. And I realized something else. Whether or not she and I ever meet again, the decision I make now is the same. To live in a way that honors what she taught me. To move towards simplicity instead of away from it. To build a life where character matters more than image, where presence matters more than performance. That's why the idea of moving to a small town in America isn't just about geography, it's about preparation. Preparation for the kind of life I want to live, the kind of husband I want to be, the kind of man I want to become. A life where love isn't a distraction from ambition, but the foundation that gives ambition meaning. Some people will never understand this choice. They'll say, I'm walking away from everything I've built, from the bright lights and the endless opportunities. But the truth is, I'm not walking away. I'm walking towards something bigger than all of that. Because what is success, really, if you have no one to share it with? What is achievement if it doesn't lead to connection? What is freedom if it's just another word for loneliness? I've lived long enough now to know that applause fades, awards collect dust, records eventually get broken. But love the kind that is rooted in character, in daily practice, in choosing each other again and again. That's the one thing that lasts. That's the one thing that makes everything else worthwhile. And so as I prepare myself for whatever comes next, I do it with a quiet certainty I didn't have before. I don't know when I'll get married. I don't know exactly who will stand beside me when I make that vow. But I do know that when the time comes, I won't run from it. I won't say no out of fear. I will step forward and say yes, not just to a person, but to a way of living that finally feels true. And maybe, if life is kind, she will be there. Maybe I'll look into the eyes of the girl I once turned away from and finally give her the answer she deserved all along. But even if it isn't her, even if it's someone else entirely, the promise will be the same. To live with presence, with honesty, with love that grows quietly but deeply. Because at the end of it all, that's what I don't regret. Not the fame, not the sacrifices, not even the mistakes. What I don't regret is finally learning that love is the only stage worth standing on forever. When I close my eyes now, I don't just see the past. I see the future shapes of a life that feels so far from the world I've known, yet somehow closer to the truth I've been searching for. A small town in America, quiet streets, wooden fences weathered by time, children playing in backyards, neighbors who greet each other not because of fame, but because that's what people do when life moves slowly enough to notice. I imagine myself there not as Jungkook of BTS, not as the man the world has watched grow up under lights, but simply as a husband. A man who wakes up each morning with a purpose that has nothing to do with charts or headlines, but everything to do with showing up for the person beside him. A man who chooses simplicity, not because he has no other options, but because he finally understands that simplicity is the rarest luxury of all. Sometimes people ask me, why America? Why not Busan? Why not Seoul? Why not somewhere familiar? The answer is simple, because I need a place where I can be both a stranger and a neighbor. A place where my story doesn't precede me, where I can walk into a grocery store and be just another person buying milk and bread. A place far enough from my old life to feel like a new beginning, but close enough to carry its lessons with me. And maybe, just maybe, because I know that the girl from my childhood, once dreamed of traveling there. I remember her talking about it when we were kids. She'd seen a picture in a book, a small American town with red autumn leaves and white wooden houses. And she said, one day, I want to live somewhere like this. Somewhere that feels quiet but alive. Back then I laughed, told her she was too romantic, too simple. But now I realize she saw something I couldn't. She understood that real life isn't about how big it looks, it's about how deeply you feel it. That memory stays with me. And when I picture myself in that small town, I can't help but wonder if that's where our paths could cross again. Maybe it's wishful thinking. Maybe life doesn't work that way. But I've learned that love isn't about guarantees, it's about possibilities. And the possibility of finding her again, even if it's only by honoring her vision of life, feels like enough reason to try. I've started making quiet plans. Nothing official, nothing public. But in my mind, I've begun sketching out what it would mean to leave behind the noise for a while. To find a small house with a porch, where the evenings are lit, not by spotlights, but by the setting Sunday. To wake up to the sound of birds instead of alarms. To cook dinner with someone who doesn't care how many views my latest video gets, but who cares whether I've really listened when she talks about her day. And in those quiet imaginings, I find myself smiling in a way I haven't in years. Not the smile for cameras, not the smile for fans, but the smile that comes when you know you're finally choosing a life that feels honest. Of course, doubt creeps in sometimes. What if I can't adapt? What if the quiet becomes suffocating instead of freeing? What if the weight of who I've been follows me even there? But then I remind myself, marriage itself is a leap into the unknown. Love is never certain. Life is never certain. The only thing that matters is whether you're willing to practice. Practice being present, practice being vulnerable, practice being the person you hope to become. That's what she wrote to me in that letter, and that's what I carry with me now. If I do find her again, I want her to see that I've been practicing too. That I've grown from the boy who once said no out of fear into the man who is ready to say yes with courage. And maybe that's what this whole journey is really about. Not about escaping Korea or fame or the life I've built, but about creating a space where I can finally live as the truest version of myself. A place where I can love without fear, where I can be ordinary without shame, where I can be extraordinary, not because of achievements, but because of how deeply I choose to care. I don't regret the years I've lived the way I have. They brought me here, they shaped me, they gave me lessons I couldn't have learned any other way. But I also know this, if the rest of my life is just a repetition of what I've already done, I'll always feel like something's missing. And I don't want to spend the next decades wondering what could have been. So when I tell you I'm moving to a small town in America after I get married, believe me when I say this isn't running away. This is running toward love. Toward meaning, toward the kind of life I once dismissed but now see as the most precious thing of all. And maybe if destiny has a sense of mercy, I'll look across a small town street one day and see her there, older, wiser, carrying her own life with her. And maybe she'll look back at me, not as the boy who said no, but as the man finally ready to say yes. For so many years, I carried the quiet weight of that one decision the moment I said no. I told myself it was the right choice, that chasing my dreams was more important than holding on to something that felt too ordinary. But the truth is, it wasn't ambition that drove me to say no. It was fear. Fear of losing myself. Fear of being vulnerable. Fear that love would demand pieces of me I wasn't ready to give. And that's the part I regret, not the choice itself, but the reason behind it. Because running away from fear doesn't make it disappear. It just waits quietly until you're forced to face it again. And here I am, years later, finally looking it in the eye. I think about her often, not with the desperation of someone clinging to the past, but with the gratitude of someone who finally understands the gift he once overlooked. She told me, without even knowing what it means to live with intention, to show up, to practice becoming. And though I once turned away from that lesson, I can't turn away from it now. That's why marriage feels different to me today. I don't see it as a loss of freedom or a box I'm forced into. I see it as an invitation, a chance to finally live the way I was too afraid to before. To be vulnerable, to be honest. To let someone see me completely without hiding behind the mask of perfection. When I picture that life in a small town, I don't just see peace and quiet. I see accountability. Because living simply doesn't mean living easily. It means being present. It means showing up, not just on the good days when laughter comes easily, but on the hard days when silence feels heavier than any crowd. It means choosing love again and again, even when it's inconvenient, even when it's difficult. And I know this, I want to be that man, the man who shows up, the man who doesn't run away, the man who finally says yes, even when fear whispers no. I don't know what the future holds. I don't know if she and I will meet again. I don't know if the girl from my childhood will ever hear these words, or if she's already living a life so far removed from mine that our stories will never touch. But what I do know is this, because of her, I will never again take love for granted. If I marry, it won't be because it looks good from the outside. It won't be because the world expects it. It will be because I found someone whose character I admire, someone who makes me want to be better, someone whose presence makes me feel like myself again. That's the promise I owe, not just to her, but to myself. And maybe that's what redemption really is. Not erasing the past, not pretending mistakes never happened, but choosing differently when you get another chance. I can't go back to that day and say yes, but I can say yes now to love, to honesty, to a life that values meaning over appearance. I've learned that regret doesn't have to chain you to the past. It can become the compass that points you toward the future. Every time I think about moving to that small town in America, I realize it's not just about geography. It's about living in a way that leaves no room for regret. A way where love isn't postponed, where connection isn't sacrificed, where character isn't overlooked. And so I prepare myself, not with a date on the calendar, not with elaborate plans, but with a quiet determination. When the time comes, I will step forward. I will say yes. I will choose love over fear, presence over performance, connection over perfection. And if life is merciful, if destiny has a way of weaving threads back together, maybe one day I'll look into her eyes again, not as the boy who ran, but as the man who finally stayed. As I sit here now, telling you all of this, I realize something important. This story isn't just about me. It isn't just about a boy from Busan who said no when he should have said yes, or about a man who now dreams of living quietly in a town where nobody knows his name. This story is about all of us, about the choices we make, the regrets we carry, and the chances we still have to live differently. For years, I thought success was about climbing higher, running faster, shining brighter. And yes, those things matter. They shaped me, they gave me purpose, they brought me here. But in the end, success without connection feels hollow. Achievement without love feels empty. The truth I've discovered is simple. The greatest stage you'll ever stand on is the life you build with someone you love. I don't know when I'll get married. I don't know what the ceremony will look like or where exactly I'll go afterwards. What I do know is this: when that day comes, I want it to be about more than vows spoken in front of a crowd. I want it to be about daily choices, about waking up and choosing love again, even on the hardest days, about practicing not perfection, but presence, not grand gestures, but small consistencies. That's what she taught me, even when I didn't realize it. That girl from my childhood, whose voice still echoes in my heart. She reminded me that character is built in the quiet moments, not the loud ones. That love isn't about what you can get, but about who you can become together. And though I once turned away from her, I carry her lesson with me now, into the man I am becoming. Maybe one day our paths will cross again. Maybe one day I'll be able to look into her eyes and finally say the words I couldn't back then. But even if that never happens, her impact remains. Because of her, I will never again take love for granted. Because of her, I will never again choose fear over connection. Because of her, I will move into the future ready to say yes. And to you, wherever you are, whoever you are listening right now, I want you to know this. It is never too late. Never too late to love again. Never too late to start over. Never too late to move toward the life that feels honest, even if it looks small from the outside. Maybe you've carried regrets. Maybe you've said no when you should have said yes. Maybe you've convinced yourself that love passed you by. But I promise you it hasn't. It's still out there, waiting for you in the quiet places where character is built, where presence matters, where people are practicing to become who they hope to be. So don't give up. Don't believe the lie that your chance has already come and gone. Whether you are in your 20s or your 60s, whether you've been married before or never at all, love can find you again. And when it does, it won't be perfect. It won't erase your scars or your mistakes, but it will be real, and real is enough. When I say I want to move to a small town in America after I get married, it's not just about distance from fame or the desire for quiet. It's about living in a way that honors what I've learned. To choose love over fear, to choose presence over performance, to choose character over image. That's the life I want. That's the life I won't regret. And maybe one day, when the lights are gone and the noise has faded, you'll find me there, just a man on a porch, watching the sunset, grateful that I finally said yes. Because in the end, that's the only choice that matters. To say yes to love, to say yes to life, to say yes to becoming the person you were always meant to be. When I ended that thought, the vision of a porch in a small town, the quiet certainty of saying yes, I realized something else. This decision isn't only about love, it's also about survival. About learning how to stay human in a world that so often demands you be more than human. For years, I lived under the pressure to be perfect, to perform endlessly, to keep giving without pause. And though I am grateful beyond words for the love and support that carried me here, I also know what it cost me. Moving to a small town isn't just about building a family. It's about remembering that I am not only an idol, not only an image, not only a dream projected onto screens. I am a person, a son, a brother, a friend, one day, hopefully, a husband, maybe even a father. And if I don't allow myself to step into that life fully, then what was all this for? I think often about Army, about how you've been with me through every stage of my life, from the boy trembling on his first stage to the man I am now. Still trembling sometimes, but for different reasons. And I wonder how you'll feel hearing this. Maybe some will be surprised. Maybe some will feel distant. Maybe some will even feel hurt. But I hope you'll understand this isn't me walking away from you. This is me walking deeper into the life that allows me to keep singing, to keep creating, to keep being honest. Because if I don't find balance, if I don't find a way to be fully myself outside of music, then eventually the music will lose its truth. And I never want that to happen. So when I imagine myself in that small town, I don't imagine leaving Army behind. I imagine carrying you with me, your stories, your letters, your love, into a space where I can breathe and create without fear. I imagine sitting in that quiet kitchen, picking up a guitar and writing songs, not for charts, but for the feeling of connection. Songs that remind us all that fame doesn't make us less human. It just makes our humanity harder to protect. And in that future, I hope you see me not as someone who abandoned the world, but as someone who finally learned how to live in it honestly. Someone who had the courage to step off the stage for a while so that when he returned, he came back whole. As for love, whether it's with the girl from my past or someone else entirely, I know now what I'm looking for. Not perfection, not grandeur, not someone to complete me, but someone to walk with me as I practice being who I hope to become. Someone who isn't afraid of my flaws, who doesn't flinch at my intensity, who doesn't see fame as a barrier but as a backdrop. Someone who believes, like she once did, that life is measured not by how loud it is, but by how deeply it's lived. And maybe that's the message I want to leave you with today. No matter who you are, no matter where you are, it is never too late to choose differently. To turn regret into redemption. To step off the path you've been running on if it no longer leads you where you need to go. To say yes when fear tells you to say no. I'm still figuring it out. I don't have all the answers. But for the first time, I'm okay with that because I know the direction I'm walking in now. Toward love, toward authenticity, toward a life that feels real. And when the time comes, when I finally stand at that crossroads, ready to get married, ready to move into that next chapter, I'll look back at this moment and know I chose it. Freely, fully, without regret. Because in the end, that's all any of us can do. To keep practicing, to keep becoming, to keep saying yes to the life that's waiting for us. The more I imagine that small town, the more it stops feeling like a dream and starts feeling like a promise. Not just to myself, but to the people I love, to the family I hope to build, and even to you, Army, who have walked this long road with me. For so long, my life has been measured by numbers, album sales, views, awards, statistics. But when I picture my future now, I don't see numbers. I see faces, I see moments, I see days lived fully, not tallied like achievements, but cherished like treasures. I imagine waking up one morning to the sound of children playing outside, not cameras clicking. I imagine walking down a quiet street, holding the hand of someone who knows me, not because of what I've achieved, but because of who I am when the lights are gone. I imagine watching the seasons change, autumn leaves falling, winter snow settling, spring flowers blooming, and realizing that for the first time in years, I'm watching life unfold without rushing past it. That's what the city took from me, sometimes time. Time to pause, time to notice, time to feel. And that's what I believe a small town can give back. Not because it's perfect, not because it's magical, but because it slows you down enough to notice the things that truly matter. And as I think about marriage, about starting that chapter of my life, I realize how important that environment will be. Because love doesn't grow in noise, it grows in attention. It grows in patience, in consistency, in the small choices that no one else sees. And I know myself, if I stay in a world that never stops moving, I'll always be tempted to chase the next stage, the next success, the next applause. But if I step into a life that moves slower, I'll have no choice but to be present. And presence, that's where love lives. I think about how I want to be remembered, not just by fans, not just by the world, but by the people closest to me. I don't want them to remember me as someone who was always gone, always distracted, always chasing. I want them to remember me as someone who showed up, as someone who sat at the dinner table and really listened, as someone who chose family not as an afterthought, but as the center. And in that vision, I can't help but think of her again, my childhood friend. The girl whose letter reminded me not to forget who I am. Whether or not she's part of my future, she has already shaped it. She taught me that love isn't about perfection, it's about practice. That life isn't about how loud it is, but how deeply it's lived. And if I can carry that lesson into my marriage, into the small town life I dream of, then maybe I'll finally be living the way I was meant to all along. Some will say I'm giving up too much, that moving away, slowing down, stepping back from the spotlight is a waste of everything I've built. But here's the truth, it isn't giving up. It's giving in to the part of me that longs for meaning more than achievement. To the part of me that understands success isn't just what you leave behind in the world, but what you leave behind in the hearts of the people who loved you. And maybe that's what I don't regret most of all. That after all these years, after all the mistakes and detours, I finally know what matters. It's not the noise. It's not the fame. It's not even the dreams that once felt bigger than life itself. What matters is love. What matters is connection. What matters is choosing every single day to live in a way that leaves no room for regret. So when I say I'm moving to a small town in America after I get married, believe me, it's not about escaping the world. It's about embracing it fully, one quiet moment at a time.